The sky of Etheris was not a void, it was a kingdom. For eons, the Zephyri had ruled the currents. Their world was a miracle of physics, thousands of floating islands drifting in a perpetual sea of golden clouds. To the Zephyri, the ground was a myth, a dark place at the bottom of the world where light went to die. They were creatures of grace, born with wings that could catch the slightest breeze and minds that could command the air itself. They didn't build walls, they built storms. They didn't have armies, they had the wind. High Elder Valen stood upon the Spire of Whispers, the highest point of the floating capital. He watched the horizon with eyes that could see the humidity in the air. For cycles, his scouts had spoken of a new shadow in the void, a cold, metal star that was descending from the great beyond. Valen was not afraid. The sky had always protected Etheris. No bird, no beast, and no machine could survive the Gale of Sorrows, the permanent hurricane that surrounded their world. Anything that tried to enter the atmosphere would be tossed like a leaf, spun until it shattered and dropped into the abyss. The intruder's approach, Valen trilled, his voice a melodic chime that resonated through the air. Let the song of the storm begin. We shall show these metal dwellers that the sky has no masters but the Zephyri. The clouds beneath the capital began to churn. Thousands of Zephyri warriors took flight, their wings beating in a rhythmic unison that vibrated the very air. They weren't just flying, they were weaving the atmosphere. They summoned the winds from the four corners of the world, focusing them into a wall of air so dense it could crush stone. They waited for the human ships to be torn apart. But the humans didn't bring ships. They brought anchors. From the upper atmosphere, the first barge appeared. It was not elegant. It was a brutal, blackened slab of industrial-grade iron, shaped like a coffin and twice as thick. It didn't try to glide. It didn't try to fight the wind. It used the planet's own gravity as a weapon. The barge fell like a meteor, its heat shields glowing a violent orange. As it hit the Gale of Sorrows, the winds hammered against it with enough force to liquefy titanium. The barge groaned, its heavy frame vibrating under the pressure, but it was too heavy to be tossed. It was too dense to be diverted. They are not flying, a Zephyri scout cried out, his wings struggling against the turbulence. They are falling. They are choosing to fall. The barge slammed into the central island of Etheris with the force of an earthquake. The impact shattered the ancient marble plazas and sent tremors through the floating rock. Before the dust could even settle, the Zephyri unleashed their fury. A massive tornado 500 feet wide descended upon the landing site. It was a vacuum of air meant to lift the barge and hurl it off the island. The barge didn't budge. Instead, four massive ports on the sides of the craft exploded outward. Colossal, 3-ton tungsten carbide anchors, attached to chains as thick as a man's torso, shot deep into the earth. The anchors didn't just hit the surface. They were driven hundreds of feet into the floating island's core by explosive charges. The chains snapped taut, glowing with the heat of the friction. The barge was now part of the island. It was an iron anchor in a sea of clouds. The ramp of the barge dropped. Through the swirling red dust and the howling hurricane stepped the iron walkers. Sergeant Marcus Thorne stepped onto the Zephyrian soil, and his first act was to lock his boots. The magnets in his heavy anchor suit engaged with the iron floor of the ramp, and then his hydraulic spikes drove into the stone. Thorne stood 6'6" in his armor, a mountain of matte gray ceramic and lead. He didn't look at the beautiful golden sky. He didn't marvel at the floating islands. He looked at the winged warriors circling above, and he adjusted the grip on his XM-20 autocannon. "Command, this is Thorne," he barked, his voice amplified by the suit's external speakers, drowning out the roar of the wind. "The island is soft, but the anchor's held. The locals are noisy. Permission to clear the LZ." "Permission granted, Sergeant," the cold, static-filled voice replied from orbit. "Secure the spire. The core of this island is rich in grav crystals. We need them for the fleet. Clear the sky." The Zephyri dove. They were a blur of blue light and silver spears. They moved with a speed that the human eye could barely track, using the wind to push them into impossible maneuvers. They expected the humans to be slow. They expected them to be off balance in the shifting winds of the storm. But Thorne didn't need to be fast. He just needed to be immovable. A Zephyri warrior, a champion named Kalo, spiraled toward Thorne at 200 miles per hour. He leveled his crystal spear, aimed at the soft neck joint of the human armor. He summoned a localized gust of wind to triple his impact force. He was a bolt of lightning hitting a rock. Thorne didn't move. He didn't even raise his gun. He leaned his shoulder forward by an inch and braced his hydraulic stabilizers. Kalo's spear hit the chest plate and shattered into 1,000 fragments. The alien champion didn't bounce off. He hit the human like he had hit a mountain. The impact snapped Kalo's light, hollow bones instantly. Thorn reached out with a hand that moved with the slow, inevitable power of a hydraulic press and grabbed Kalo by the wing. "You're light," Thorn grunted. "Too light." With a casual flick of his wrist, Thorn slammed the alien into the ground. He didn't use a weapon. He used the alien's own lack of mass against him. The stone floor cracked. Kalo didn't get up. Above him, the Zephyri elders screamed in horror. They summoned the Mother of all winds, a gale so powerful it had once stripped the forests of the lower world. The wind hit the island with such force that the entire continent tilted 5 degrees. The trees were uprooted, the Zephyri buildings were shredded, and the very clouds were blown away. The human soldiers didn't fly away. They engaged their gravity hooks. Small, high-velocity cables shot out from their belts, anchoring them to the barge's hull and the deep-seated tungsten chains. They crouched low, their suits' weight distribution systems shifting to keep them centered. To the Zephyri, it looked like the humans were part of the metal itself. They were anchors in the storm, refusing to acknowledge the power of the sky. "Fire!" Thorn commanded. The human line erupted. They weren't using lasers or energy weapons that could be deflected by the wind. They were using dumb lead. Heavy, high-velocity slugs that had enough mass to punch through the pressurized air. The tracers created a web of death in the sky. The Zephyri, accustomed to fighting other winged creatures or slow-moving beasts, had no defense against the kinetic rain. Their wings were shredded, their elegant formations broken. They fell from the sky like broken dolls, dropping into the abyss they had once called home. Valen watched from the spire, his heart cold. He saw the humans advancing. They weren't running, they were walking. Every step was a heavy clank thud as their boots gripped the stone. They were a slow, gray tide of iron that was swallowing his world. They moved with a terrifying disregard for the heights. They didn't fear the fall because they had anchored themselves to the world so tightly that the world would have to break before they did. "We must destroy the anchors," Valen cried out. "If the barge falls, they fall with it." The Zephyri suicide squads dove for the tungsten chains. They used their crystal blades to hack at the metal, but the chains were 3 inches of solid, heat-treated steel. It was like trying to cut a mountain with a toothpick. The humans on the deck simply turned their autocannons toward the chains and cleared the air. They didn't even have to aim precisely. The sheer volume of lead turned the area around the anchors into a meat grinder. Thorn reached the base of the Spire of Whispers. He looked up at the elegant, soaring architecture of the Zephyri capital. It was a place of glass, light, and air. To him, it was just an obstacle between him and the resource he was sent to collect. "Sully, bring up the breaker," Thorn said into his comms. From the barge, a massive, treaded vehicle rolled out. It was a thermal drill, a machine designed for carving through the crust of a planet. It ignored the stairs, it ignored the paths. It simply drove straight into the base of the spire, its diamond-tipped head screaming as it ground the Zephyri history into dust. Valen stood at the top of the tower as the floor began to vibrate. He saw Thorn enter the chamber, the human's armor covered in the blue blood of the skyguards and the red dust of the island. Thorn didn't look like a conqueror. He looked like a worker. He looked like a man finishing a long day at the factory. "Why?" Valen asked, his voice cracking. "We offered you no threat. We are creatures of the light and the air. We only wanted to be left to our songs." Thorn looked at the High Elder, then at the massive, glowing blue crystals that powered the tower's levitation. He reached out and tapped the crystal with a metal finger. "Your songs don't power starships, pal. These do. And my people? We've got a lot of ships that need to move." "You will fall," Valen hissed, his wings trembling. "The sky will eventually reclaim you. You are too heavy for this world." Thorn walked to the edge of the balcony, looking out over the conquered island. He could see the other barges landing on the distant horizons, each one driving its iron anchors into the heart of the Zephyri world. He could see the sky being choked by the black smoke of human industry. "Maybe," Thorn said, not looking back. "But today the sky is ours. And the thing about being heavy, Elder? It means when you hit something, you're the one that stays standing." Thorn raised his hand and signaled the fleet. The great harvest had begun. The Zephyri, the masters of the air, were now just refugees in their own sky, watching as the unmovable took everything they owned. They had the wind, but the humans had the anchors. And in the end, mass always wins. The conquest of Etheris was not a battle of heroes. It was a battle of physics. The humans didn't win because they were better flyers. They won because they refused to fly at all. They brought the crushing reality of the ground to a world that had forgotten what it felt like to be pinned down. And as the islands were stripped of their crystals and sent crashing into the dark below, the galaxy learned a new lesson about the mercenaries of Sol. If you live in the clouds, don't invite the humans. Because they won't just visit, they'll bring the whole mountain with them. This has been Apex Sci-Fi. Keep your feet on the ground. If you enjoyed this heavy conquest of the sky, hit that like button. Comment below. If you lived on a floating island, what would be the first thing you'd build to stop a human invasion? Subscribe for the next conquest of Saga 9, the Industrial Scourge. The anchors are deep. The sky is dark.